7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So I'm here today with Edy Nathan. Nathan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At the Boston Trauma Research Foundation conference, the Bessel van der Kolk annual conference. And I'm really happy that we have this conversation with you, Edy. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. We're going to talk about what you're doing. You have a book, but you have also trainings. You have a podcast. You are doing a lot around grief, sexual grief. So maybe we're going to define what you've been doing all those years and what sexual grief is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So it started with grief, right? And grief is often something nobody really wants to talk about, because it's about what we're yearning for, what we're missing, what we're hungry for. And it started because I lost my partner when I was very young, and I had nowhere to go. And this book, my first book on grief, was my response to that loss and how to move with grief. And it's not something you get over, and perhaps you learn to dance with it. You learn to incorporate it and integrate it. And what I found is, working with grief, that there was so much trauma in the people who were grappling with it the most, who were struggling with it the most. I couldn't understand 2 years in, 3 years in, the grief doesn't disappear, but the way they were still in deep mourning was still present. So I started to do a deeper dive. So what else is going on here? And it was then that the realization came, there's a traumatic imprint. There's some sexual trauma, there's some developmental trauma that they're going through. And that then began the journey of, I think this might be called sexual grief. And I developed this energy around being in discovery. What is this thing that I research? It's not around. No one's talking about this sexual grief. And so, as anything that we do, we keep defining and redefining grief. We have a definition for, but how do you define this? And so it's a work in progress. Yes. And right now, that it means that anyone who's been sexually traumatized by a predatory event or a developmental experience, and it leaves them feeling like they can't get out of that experience or event. They keep reliving it. And it can be PTSD, but not necessarily. So that's this new movement of sexual grief.
So you were saying that when working with grief, with your own grief, you realized that not being able to overcome the loss was linked to previous or childhood trauma or sexual abuse or developmental trauma.
Yeah, that's exactly
That's what you've been finding.
Yeah, that's what I've been finding. And so the deeper dive then became, okay, so what if it's not just affecting people who've lost someone or who are dealing with the losses in their lives? Because you and I both know, right? Grief is not just about the loss of a loved one. We learned that especially during COVID. It's about so many other things. The loss of one's personal identity or sense of oneself. And that's now an added piece to this sexual grief, that it's the losses that have been incurred as a result of feeling like you're imprisoned, but it is also the loss of the self. It is that precious part of ourselves that we want to feel we know, And yet we've lost. We've lost an idea of who we are and how we are in the world. And what does this affect? It affects one's ability, yes, to be intimate. That's the sexual personal identity, but it affects the ability to go out into the world and feel like you can get a job or learn or hold on to information that's important or become friends and have a friendship, have it's like thwarting loneliness. It's fighting against a sense sometimes of self-disgust or self-loathing, and finding ways to help people liberate enough so they can get to love. And love is personal identity and confidence in that, and being able to say, I like who I am, and I can be in the world, and I can be my own warrior.
So what is the link with sexual or sexuality?
So when we think about sexuality, we might think about sex itself, a partnership, right? And intimacy. And then there's that primal sexual self, the thing that most of us are born with, which helps us to identify ourselves in the world. And I say most of us because it certainly doesn't fit all of us. And that sexual self is the driver. And when that driver is missing, then it affects desire. It affects the desire to be successful or to understand your urges. And again, urges are not just sexual in nature, right? So when I talk about the sexual self, though it might be initially heard of as, oh, let's talk about sex. Yes, and we're talking about, oh, how can we evolve with that primal driver? And if the driver is deadened or is grieving or feels imprisoned, the driver needs to find a way out. And what I actually teach, and it sounds, and we're living in a world right now where I am very sensitive to the word I am now going to use, okay? And yet people who have this traumatic imprint that I'm talking about, they feel like they're held hostage by their past, by being not wanted as a child, by something called period poverty, and from those predatory events. So there is that developmental timeline, and there are the predatory events, and sometimes they come together, and sometimes they stand on their own, and they don't work in consort, right? So I help people learn to be their own healers. I'm not the healer. They are. I give them strategies that are hostage negotiation strategies that are actually used by the FBI here to negotiate for people who are actual hostages. And so it is about being curious. What's going on with me? I need to talk to the part of me that is entrapped. I need to talk to the part of me that is stuck. And so curiosity, it's usually the first thing we don't want to be, right? So that is the beginning of someone becoming their own healer in this. And then there's empathy and compassion. Compassion, self-compassion when you don't have a driver. If you don't have the driver, you're lacking the compassion. So we would then work on compassion and the building of that empathy and compassion. And then there's rapport. So in a true hostage negotiation, that development of the rapport is the point at which the hostage taker can start to change. If you don't have the rapport, a sense of, I understand you, I'm not going to judge you. I'm actually going to kind of love you. Kind of just say, God, you've had it hard. And I may not understand how you got there, but I understand that you're in pain now. And that builds from curiosity to empathy, compassion, to the development of the rapport. And then the next goal is, let's bring the mind and body back into sync, because it's what I call the guillotine effect, right? We've got the head and it's walking around with all these stories, and the body is very disconnected. And what we want is to bring that body and mind back into connection. And it's done through exercises and breathing, but also the knowledge that the driver is part of this. And then it's that last stage is grace. The last strategy is about grace, and it's about talking to the self and knowing what your warning labels are. And we all have warning labels. I don't know if this happens on mattresses where you live, but on our mattresses in the United States, there are warning labels, and those warning labels say, do not cut off this label or you will go to jail. It's a federal offense if you cut off the label. So we all have warning labels that we walk around with. When you get to know yourself within this sexual grief modality, or even within your grief, you can begin to identify what your warning label is, and they will change situationally, depending if you're an extrovert, an introvert. But when you begin to have that conversation, it's your protection. And so this work is about finding your protections.
And so the trainings that you're offering are for the lay public or general public or for therapists, or what is it?
It is both for clinicians and for the lay person, and the trainings sometimes are both together and then sometimes separate, because the languaging I might use professionally is going to be very different than the languaging I use with the layperson. That layperson, I don't want them to get bogged down with complicated languaging. That's not fair to them. Their minds are already in chaos. I want to break down that chaos. I want to make this as simple as possible, because it's already complicated and complex within them. And then for the layperson, in a way, the languaging helps them disappear or be invisible. So I may use the languaging, but I'll help them find new wording for languaging that they may have been hiding behind. And so instead of saying, I'm a healer and I'm going to heal you, it is a languaging of, I want to participate in watching you become your own healer. And that is for both the layperson and the clinician. And it gives each a sense of empowerment. One, it gives the clinician less of an onus on them. It's like, I can work with you and give this to you, and yet your healing is yours. And I don't want you to fuse with me as my client. I want you to fly. For the layperson, I'm saying you can fly, and you can extricate yourself from this hostage taker called sexual grief.
So you've written a book. I'm going to take it.
Yes.
So, we'll translate it into French. What is it about, and what can people find in your book? What's the story of your book?
I thought it was my life's work, but now the second book will be my life's work. And I swore when I wrote it I would never write another book, and I guess that's just what authors say a lot. I'd say that the story is that when I lost my partner at 27, I had nowhere to go. People told me, and it was hard to hear, you're young, and you'll find another partner, and it's all going to be fine. And I'll be honest with you, Florence, that was the worst thing somebody could have said. It was like, I don't want to find anybody. This man was the love of my life. And I realized, okay, I'm going to change my life. I was going into corporate America. I was going to train on drugs and abuse. And I'm like, I gotta understand grief. And all of the books on grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is she brought grief into our conversation, and she wrote a book called The 5 Stages of Grief. But she wrote that for people who were dying, not for people who were living with grief. And there's been a misunderstanding of, oh, all I have to do is go through those 5 stages, and I'm done, and grief will be over. And I realized grief is never over. The way you hold on to it changes and shifts, but I don't want to forget my love. I want to dance with him and dance with the loss of that injury, of that rupture, because it was a rupture. And so what I do in the book is very easily present 11 phases of grief, because grief is nonlinear and we move in and out of it, and there's no order. It's as individual as our fingerprint. That's what I usually say, you know. And so I think that's maybe one of the most important parts of this book. Also, I think that I don't want to hit people over the head with a conversation of grief. So it's a lot of stories and metaphors, and again, not heavily psychological, but more like these are easy steps you could follow, and I'm a guide and a witness, and you can do this. And so my hope for the book is it's a container and it is a holder for anyone going with and through and dancing into their grief.
So you were saying, and I think it will end well our session, is that you never get out of the grief or let go of the grief, but it doesn't, and you don't want to forget your
No.
love,
No.
but that doesn't prevent you from loving again
No.
and building strong relationship.
That's right.
And finding a new partner.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe that's a hope.
That is hope. Absolutely. And it is, I'd also say that the book is about hope. That's why it's like, let's dance. And people like, why did you choose that word dance, you know? Because it is a dance, because you partner with it and you learn to partner with yourself and with others. And that loss taught me about love as well as loss and grief. And so I carry the love of that partnership with me into my next partnerships, and the ability to be intimate again is because of what I was taught in that very first love relationship. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Is there anything you want to add or you want to say to our French speaking people, whether in Europe, in Canada, in Africa?
So can I ask you, is The Wizard of Oz known?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy was given those red shoes, and she went through the entire story never knowing the power of those shoes. And everyone has those red shoes. And so I guess I just want to leave your audience with the idea that they own their red shoes. And I know that even though they have them and may not know the power of them, that they will find that power.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.